Om Sadashivasamārambhām Shankarācārya-madhyamām Asmadācārya-paryantāം Vande Guru-parampārām. Om Sahana Bhavatu Sahana Bhunaktu Saha Vīryam Karvāvahai Tejasvinavadhitamastu ma vidvishavahai. Om Shanti Shanti Shanti. Om Tat Sat. Om Namah Shivaya. So we have completed chapter 2, which was called Vaithatya Prakaranam. And what did chapter 2 deal with? In one word, one sentence. What was the content of chapter 2? We just finished, right? So you could not have forgotten so fast.
Mithyatvam of the world, Jagat.
Mithyatvam of the world. So Jagan Mithya has been established. What remains now to be established is Brahma Satyam. So, and that is what this particular chapter is dealing with. So this whole chapter is an exposition on the word Advaitam, which, if you remember, comes in the 7th mantra. So we will go to chapter 3. It's called Advaita Prakaranam. And we'll go to Karika number 1. So please chant with me. Upasana Shrito Dharmaha.
Upasana Shrito
Dharma.
Upasana Shrito Dharmaha.
Upasana Shrito Dharma.
Jate Brahmani Vartate.
Jate Brahmani Vartate.
Pragutpatte Rajat Sarvam. Pragutpatte Rajam Sarvam.
Pragutpatte Rajam Sarvam.
Tena Saukrapana Smrataha. Okay, so the breakup of the first word of the second line, Prag Utpattehe Ajam Sarvam. The ra is a joiner, so when you break it up, Prag Utpattehe, the verb converts into Visarga, Prag Utpattehe Ajam Sarvam. So the first line says Dharmaha. So now Dharmaha here has a specific meaning. Dharma refers to the Jiva, not the normal meaning of Dharma which we take. And why does Dharma refer to the Jiva? So Anandagiri in his, Shankara doesn't bother to tell us. Anandagiri in his Tika says, Dharanat Dharma. Remember that the definition of Dharma is that which supports. Dharanat, that is Dharma. So Anandagiri says, this Dharma here means Jiva. Because there is a Dharana, he is a supporter. Of what? What does Jiva support? What does he possess?
Ahankara, the ego concept, Jiva Bhav.
No, here he says the Jiva is that entity which supports the body. The body is alive because there is a Sukshma Shariram there. And therefore, Sharirasya Dharana Dharmaha. Jiva is called Dharma because he supports the body. And here, remember, Upasana is mentioned. Upasana Ashrito Dharma. Means what? The Jiva, he takes to Upasana. Upasana Ashritaha. He resorts to Upasana. And Upasana means Saguna Ishvara Dhyanam. The Lord with form. And therefore, what does Gaudapada say? Vartate Jate Brahmani. Vartate means remains. So this jiva, who is the supporter of the body, he takes to upasana, he takes to the worship of Saguna Ishvara, and therefore vartate. He remains in what? Jate Brahmani. Now, Jate Brahmani here is Jata means that which is subject to birth. So he remains engrossed, established in that Brahman who is subject to birth. So Karyam Brahma he remains engrossed in, not Karanam Brahma. Why? Because this Jiva who is worshipping Saguna Brahma, he does not know the Nirguna Brahman. That Nirguna Brahman is Karya, Karana, Vilakshana Brahman. That Nirguna Brahman is neither the Karanam, neither the cause, nor the product. Right? And this sadhaka, this Jiva, because he is taken to Saguna worship, he is either worships Virat Ishvara or he worships Hiranyagarbha Ishvara. So he is either Vishwa or he is Tajasa. And both of this, Virat Ishvara as well as Hiranyagarbha Ishvara, remember they are Karyam. They are product only. And because of that, he also takes himself as Vishwa or Tajasa, again as products. And what is the thinking then? Prag utpattehe ajam sarvam. Prag utpattehe, he thinks Prag Srishti Utpattehe. He thinks that before Srishti began, what Sarvam Ajam. Everything was there in the form of that Saguna Ishvara only. And therefore he has an idea that before the creation, Ishvara alone was there. And out of that Ishvara, creation has come about. Which means that Ishvara is Karanam and the Jagat is the Karyam. Ishvara is the cause and the universe is the product. This is what he thinks. Now this is normal, right? This is what the normal thinking is. So why is Gaudapada putting it here? Normal teaching is what? Before the world was born, everything was Ishvara alone. Then the world came, everything is Ishvara alone. And then the world dissolves, everything is Ishvara alone. So Ishvara was the Karanam, Ishvara is, from Ishvara came the world, and the world then resolved back into Ishvara. But here, we are taking one step away from duality. So here there is a criticism of the worshipper, the sadhaka, as well as the worshipped deity also. There is criticism because Gaudapada says that as long as you worship, there is duality. There is a sadhaka and there is a sadhyam. There is a upasaka and there is upasyam. This is Dvaitam only. Dvaitam can never give moksha. Of course, Dvaitam is necessary for Chitta Shuddhi. Now, why is it said that Upasana cannot give moksha? Because Upasana is a karma only. It's a mental action. And we have seen that karma can produce only 4 types of results. Do you remember? What are the 4 types of results of karma?
Apti, Utpatti, Samskaryam, Vikaryam.
Yes. Apti, Utpatti, Samskaryam, Vikaryam. Apti means reaching somewhere. Utpatti means being born. Samskaryam is purification. Vikaryam is modification or change. And that is why this Upasaka, he assumes that after death, he will reach that Brahman, Apti. He thinks that karma will give him the path by which he will go to Brahman. And this is the error. Because we saw in Keno Upanishad, we saw one nice little mantra which said, Yed Vachana Bhyuditam Yena Vag Abhyudyate Tadeva brahmatvam vidhi nedam yadidam upasitam. What did it mean? That by which that Brahman is not that by which some object is revealed to you. Tadeva brahmatvam vidhi nedam yadidam upasate. It is the very force because of which you can use your pramanams. Those Brahman is not the words. Brahman cannot be revealed by words, right? But it is the very cause of those words which can reveal Brahman to you. The very words which you are studying, your capacity to understand those words, what is the power behind that capacity? That is Brahman. So he says, Tadeva Brahma Tvam Vidhi. Understand that to be Brahman, not that deity whom you worship. Unless you understand this, you will never get moksha. And the Upasaka does not understand this. So Gaudapada is saying every Upasaka, for him, Dvaitam is present because there is the worshipper and there is the worshipped. And therefore it is that very Upasana itself which is keeping that Upasaka in samsara. Every Saguna Upasaka remains with Dvaitam only, duality only. There is the Upasaka, Upasya Dvaitam. The worshipper, worshipped duality is there, and he misunderstands moksha. What is his thinking? I am away from God, and in moksha, I will join God. I have come back from God, I am going back to God. So, coming from the Lord, he takes as samsara, and going back to the Lord, he takes as moksha. Why is this concept wrong? Because the moment I say that I have come from Ishvara, what has happened? I have become the product, and Ishvara has become the God, has become the Karana, the cause. And then when I say I'm going back to God, I can be sure that the process will be repeated and I will be coming back in the next creation. So whenever you think that there is a Ishvara who is your creator and you are the created, you can be sure that at the end of the creation, your idea is, I will go back to Ishvara, and therefore you will be reborn again in the next Srishti. So this is the idea that this Upasaka has. And what is moksha? Moksha is the idea that I am that Brahman which was, which is, and which will ever be free. I don't have a moksha which is coming to me in the future. Moksha is my very nature itself, right? And therefore, he says, Tena. Tena here means what? Because of that thinking. Which thinking? That I am the product and Ishvara is the cause. Asau kripana smrataha. This person is a miserable person. So normally in Karma Kanda, Upasakas are glorified, because one step better than people who do only karma. And then we have lots of scriptures which say that Upasana gives you a better fruit, a better punyam than only plain karma, and therefore you can go to Brahma Loka and get moksha over there. So there's a lot of glorification of Upasakas. But for the Vedantin, for Gaudapada, he says these Upasakas are Kripanaha. Kripanaha means misers. They are unfortunate people. Why? Because they have not used the birth which they have for that particular purpose for which the birth could have been used. Like a miser is a person who does not use his wealth for himself or for others. Then this person is also a miser because his birth he has wasted. He has not used it to give himself moksha. So this is the opening Karika. Now we will look at the second Karika, Karika number 2. अतो वक्ष्याम कार्पण्यम्
अथो
अथो
वक्ष्याम्यकार्पण्यम्
वक्ष्याम्यकार्पण्यम्
अजाति समतां गतम्
अजाति
अजातिसमतां
समतां
गतम्
गतम्
यथा न जायते किंचित
यथा न
यथा
यथा
न
न
जायते
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 किञ्चित्
किञ्चित्
जायमानं समन्ततः
जायमानं
जायमानं
समन्ततः
समन्ततः
जायमानं समन्ततः
the simple verse ataha therefore wherefore because of all that has been said in the previous karika, because of all that, vakshyami, I will teach you that Brahman. And what kind of Brahman? Gatam samatam, that Brahman which has no change in it. Samatam gatam, no change. Nirvakara Brahman. And he uses a very important word, ajatihi, in which Brahman there is no creation at all. So ajatihi has to be taken as that which does not have birth and which itself does not produce any product. So that Brahman which is not a cause, which is not a karanam at all. So that Brahman in which no creation can take place. And in such a Brahman, akarpanyam. So that word has to be broken carefully. Akarpanyam. Vakshyami akarpanyam. Akarpanyam means in which there is no misery, no misfortune, no changes caused by time, no vikara. In short, samsara free Brahman or samsara free Turyam. So here there is a Shruti Vakyam which we have not done. It's in Chandogya Upanishad. It's worth remembering. Yatra Anyaha, in which there is no other. He is talking about that samsara free Brahman. Yatra na Anyaha, there is no other. Anyaha na Pashyati, you don't see anybody else. Anyaha na Shunoti, you don't hear anything else. Anyaha Vijanati, you don't know anything else. That Brahman is the real Brahman. The Shruti quote is actually Yatranyo Anyat Pashyati, Anyat Shunoti, Anyat Vijanati Tadalpam, which means where you see something else, where you hear something else, where you know something else, remember Tad Alpam. That is only finite. That in which nothing else is there. No vikara, no change, no perception, no hearing. That is called Turyam. That is called Samsara free Turyam. Then the next word is Yatha Kinchit Jayamanam Samantataha na Jayate. So Jayamanam Samantataha means even though everything appears to be constantly born. In this universe, when you look around, you see things appearing and disappearing. It appears as if jivas are born. It appears as if trees are born. It appears as if planets are born. But he says, yatha na jayate. In short, nothing is really born. What you are seeing is only appearances. And he says, kinchit na jayate. Even the smallest object is not born. And Shankara, in his commentary, he wants to explain this. So he says, it is like the person seeing the snake. Why does he see the snake? Because he has not perceived the rope very clearly. Since he is unable to see the rope clearly, for him, there is an appearance of the snake from the rope. In fact, he says, there is no factual origination or birth at all. Right? And here, those who are familiar with Purusha Suktam, they remember the verse, Ajayamano Bahuda Vijayate. Even though that Brahman is unborn, even though that Purusha is unborn, Bahuda Vijayate, he appears as many. How can you explain this? Only by saying that there is one Brahman and he appears, who is Satyam, and he appears as many Mithya objects. So that is Karika number 2. Karika number 3. Atma yakashavajjivaihi
आत्मा
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 याकाशवज्जीवैः
याकाशवज्जीवैः
kakashairiboditaha
वेदाकाशैर्विबोधितः
आकाशैर्विबोधितः
tadivaccha sanghataihi
घटादिवच्च सन्धातैः
घटादिवत्ससङ्घातैः
ata vetan nidarshanam nidarshanam
जाता
आता वेति
दर्शनम्
तन्निदर्शनम्
chata vetan darshanam
जाता
जाता वेति
दर्शनम्
निदर्शनम्
निदर्शनम्
So he says atma hi akashavat. This atma is indeed like space, and jivaihi uditaha. It is born as seemingly as a jiva, just like ghatakashaihi, just like the pot spaces are born. It is also born sanghatahi cha, also born in the form of bodies, ghatadivat, and the bodies are like the pots. So he's comparing the bodies to the pots and the jivas to the pot space. Etat nirdarshanam. This is the example for what jatau. Jatau means with regard to birth of jivas. So this particular philosophy, particular prakriya is called ajativada. Ajati means where there is no birth at all. And this teaching comes in 4 different stages. So first we look at, we all are aware of Jiva Srishti and Ishvara Srishti. The Jiva Srishti means creation of Jiva. So in Karikas, from here up to Karika number 9, he will logically, using logic, he will show that Jiva is not born out of Brahman. I request you all not to open out your mics. Then, in the 10th Karika, he will, after having negated the idea that Jiva is born out of Brahman, in the next Karika, 10th Karika, he will negate the idea that the universe is also born. And then in the following Karikas, he will give the Shastric support for the negation of Jiva and the Shastric support for the negation of the world. So first, logically negating Jiva's birth, logically negating the Jagat's birth, then Shastric support for both these negations. This is the way this will progress. And to give a brief overview of the first set, that is from Karika number 3 to Karika number 9, he takes an example. He takes the example of Ghatakashaha, pot space, and Mahakashaha, total space. So he says pot space can be compared to the Jivatma, and the total space can be compared to the Paramatma. And if you don't understand these ideas properly, then you have a number of misconceptions possible. What are those misconceptions? The first misconception is that pot space is born out of total space. Why is it a misconception? Because when you inquire into the pot space, you will realize the pot space is never born. What is born?
The pots.
The pot is
The pot is born. And when the pot is born, the birth of the pot you attribute to the birth of pot space. There is really nothing called pot space. It is always total space only. What happens is when the pot is born, you have an enclosed space, which you now call pot space. So the birth which belonged to the container is incorrectly transferred to the content. The container is the pot, the content is the space. And because you incorrectly transfer the birth, that same space, which is nothing but total space, Maha Akasha, you give it a new name called pot space, Ghata Akasha. So that is the first misconception possible. Then the next misconception is when the pot is broken, we say the pot space is gone. You forget what? The destruction belongs to the pot. Nothing happens to the space. But the attribute, that event which belongs to the pot, destruction event, you have transferred it to the space, and now you say pot space is destroyed. The third problem is when the air gets polluted, the air, not the space. When the air gets polluted, you transfer that attribute to the space and you say space is polluted, right? And the fourth one is there is an individuality associated with every pot space. So in a big spot, there is big space. In a small pot, there is small space. Actually, the bigness or the smallness, where do they belong? They belong to the pots, to the containers. But in our usage, we transfer that attribute which belongs actually to the containers. We transfer it to the space and we say there is a big space, small space, round space, square space, all these adjectives we give. We forget that space is asangaha. It has no attributes. It has no individuality also. Then you say that out of the total space, the pot space is born. Thereby, there is a connection or sambandha which is imagined between the pot space and total space. That itself is a misconception. There is only one indivisible space. That space is partless. It cannot be divided. The division of that space into pot space happens in our minds and creates a karana karya sambandha. Cause product connection is created. Relationship is created. But in truth, there is no such entity as pot space. When the pot space itself is not there, where is the question of its product, of its karanam, of its cause is not there. So these 5 misconceptions we have to now extend to the Jivatma. How do we do? First is birth. The Jivatma is never born. Why? Atma is the total consciousness. The bodies are born. And the enclosed consciousness or the reflected consciousness, we give that name Jivatma. The birth belongs to the container body, not to the Atma, but we transfer that birth to the Atma and say Jivatma is born. Similarly, destruction. The destruction belongs to the body only. Jivatma is never destroyed, but we say Jivatma dies or Jivatma is dead. Then Jivatma seems to have several defects, impurities. Raga, Dvesha, Kama, Krodha, all these. They don't belong to Atma at all. They belong to the mind. But we extend that to the Atma. And if you remember Nirvana Shatakam, it says it very nicely. Name Dvesha Ragau, Name Lobha Mohau, Mado Naiva Me Naiva Vatsarya Bhavaha. Name Dvesha Ragahu. Raga and Dvesha, they don't belong to me. Name Lobha Mohau. Lobaha, greed, and moha, delusion, they also don't belong to me. Mado naiva, pride doesn't belong to me. Naiva Matsarya Bhavaha. Jealousy also doesn't belong to me. Na dharmo, na chartho, na kamo, na moksha. The four purusharthas, dharma, artha, kama, moksha, they don't belong to me. What am I? Chidananda Rupa, Shivoham, Shivoham. I am pure consciousness. So all the defects, they belong to the bodies only, but we transfer them to the Atma. Similarly, the individuality. I am the Atma. I don't have any individuality at all. I have no specifications. I am never born. So where is the question of my biodata? Whatever individuality is said to belong to me actually belongs to the container body. Remember, Jivatma has no attributes, no individuality at all. And the last one is the relationship, Sambandha. We say Jivatma comes from Paramatma, but actually Jivatma and Paramatma are only two different names for the same Atma. The total Atma is called the Paramatma. The seemingly enclosed, seemingly reflected Atma is called the Jivatma. It is the same Atma. And for a relationship, for a Sambandha, you need two entities. When there is only one Atma, where is the question of a relationship? Sambandha is also a misconception. This in brief is what these Karikas say. Now let us look at this particular Karika, which we just read. Okay. What does it say? Atma hi akashavat. Atma is like the total space. Udita jivaihi, seemingly born as jiva. Just as the total space is seemingly understood as spot space, the total Atma is seemingly understood as Jivatma. And Uditaha here has to be taken as Utpannaha, originate from. Then Ghatakashai Ivaha. The Jiva is compared to the pot space, the content. And he says, Sanghataihi. Atma is also born in the form of the Sanghataha. Sanghata means the body, mind, sense complex. And therefore, Gatadivat. These bodies can be compared to the pots. The bodies are compared to pots, and the jivas are compared to the pot space. Okay, now he says the total space not only appears as the pot space, but also appears as the pot. Right now, we are used to the idea of total space being enclosed and therefore appearing as pot space. How do you explain his comment that it's also in the form of a pot? See, all the Vedanta that we study, this is a common idea that total space is there. When an enclosure pot comes in, the enclosed space is called pot space. But how do you say that? So I can understand the idea that pot space is born from total space. But how do I understand the idea that pot is born from total space, not just pot space? Pot is born from total space. Shankara thinks we are all advanced Vedantics, so he does not offer any comments. But we have sub-commentators, thankfully. So Anandagiri says, the statement that pot is born from Akasha can be taken as the Akasha provides the space for the origination of the pot. Also, he says, you can say that pot space, when you say pot space, you can say that pot provides the space for the origination of Akasha. Right? Do you understand? Hopefully. Anybody who doesn't understand? The pot,
Sir, the
The
first,
second.
yeah,
pot is
the first
born
part we
because of the
understand.
space. The
Yes.
pot space is born why? Because of the pot. Therefore, the pot provides the conditions for the pot space to be born. That is one explanation, right? Then there is another commentator called Sachidananda Saraswati. He provides a simpler explanation based on Tattva Bodha. What will be that explanation?
Everything
say-
comes from space only. First space
Correct.
is born, then.
Absolutely. So in terms of Tattva Bodha, first comes Akasha, then from Akasha Vayu is born, then from Vayu Agni is born, then from Agni Jalam is born, and from Jalam Prithvi is born. Prithvi is earth, the pot. And therefore Akasha is the primary first cause for the first karanam for the pot as well as for the spot space. How? First from Akasha comes the pot, and because the pot is born, then comes the spot space. So that is what it means over here. And this we have to extend to Paramatma Jivatma. We have to say that Paramatma is born in the form of Jivatma, and that is the example of Akasha is born in the form of Jivatma. Sorry, pot space. Akasha becoming pot space is the same as saying Paramatma is born as Jivatma, and Paramatma is also born in the form of the Jagat. That is the example saying that from space comes the pot. Both pot space and the pot are born from total space. Both Jivatma as well as the Jagat are born from total space. Jagat, remember, is referring to the bodies also. Okay. If this is clear, then what are we doing? We are comparing Akasha with Atma. What are the common features between Akasha and Atma? Can you enumerate some?
It's all pervading,
All pervading. Then
non-product or cause of the body.
it is not perceptible. Indriya agocharaha. Space cannot be seen.
Asanga,
Atma cannot be seen. Asangaha. Then
Nirmala. We
Nirmala.
cannot.
Then Nir Avayavaha. Without parts.
Without parts. Nirava.
Also Sarva Adharaha. The substratum of everything. So these are the comparisons between Paramatma and Jivatma. And then Etad Nirdarshanam Jatauhu. Gaudapada says these are the examples with regard to the birth and deaths of jivas. Gaudapada is pointing out that this is a compromise used in the beginning for teaching beginners in Advaita. Once this idea is understood, then the mind can be prepared for dismissing the idea of birth and death. So initially you do the superimposition, adhyaropa. You introduce the idea of birth and death, introduce the idea of a jiva, then you say there is no birth and there is no death, there is no jiva at all. There is only Brahman, that is apavada. Superimposition, then negation. That is the idea being conveyed. Now we look at Karika number 4, which we will chant. घटादिषु प्रलीनेषु
घटादिषु
Dukkalineshu.
काकाशादयो यथा
घटाकाशादयो यथा
आकाशे सम्प्रलीयन्ते
आकाशे सम्प्रलीयन्ते
तद्वज्जीवा इहात्मनि.
तद्वज्जीवा इहात्मनि.
So we talked about birth, death, defects, all those things. They are being taken up in that same serial order. Karika 3 dealt with the births, and this Karika number 4, it talks about the destruction, the deaths. So ghatadishu pralineshu, when the containers, the pots, etc., pralineshu, they perish. What happens? Ghata akashadayaha, the pot, space, etc., akashe sampraliyante, they resolve into the total akasha. Right? And here I should point out that the verb resolve or merge is very figurative by nature. There is no real merger. The pot space does not merge into total space. What happens is only the pot has been destroyed. The destruction of the pot, we take it through error as the merger of the pot space. And that is why we say things like Jnani has merged into Brahman. There is no merger at all. Jnani is not different from Brahman. And therefore he says, Tatvat, in the same manner, Jivaha ihatmani sampraliyante. The same manner, the Jivatma seemingly merge into the Paramatma. It's just an idea. Just as the pot space seemingly merges, similarly, the Jivatma seemingly merges. Okay. Now, verse number 5. Yathai घटाकाशे
यतैकस्मिन् घटाकाशे
यथैकस्मिन् घटाकाशे
रजो धूमादिभिर्युते
रजो धूमादिभिर्युते
धूमादिभिर्युते
न सर्वे संप्रयुज्यन्ते
न सर्वे
न सर्वे
संप्रयुज्यन्ते
सम्प्रयुज्यन्ते
न सर्वे संप्रयुज्यन्ते
न
न
सर्वे
सर्वे सम्प्रयुज्यन्ते
संप्रयुज्यन्ते
तद्वज्जीवा सुखादिभिः.
तद्वज्जीवा सुखादिभिः.
सुखादिभिः.
So birth was talked about, destruction was talked about. The third one is the defects. So the first misconception is that when the pot is dirty, there is a foul smell in the pot. It could be because of some, let us say, impure food left in the pot, or it could be because the foul smell belongs to the air which is there in the pot. But in both cases, what do you say? You say the pot space is polluted. In both the cases, in one case, the smell belongs to the pot because the food is there in the pot. In the other case, the smell belongs to the air. The space itself, the pot space itself, has no impurities, has no small smell. Smell is only either the pot or the air. And yet, what do we say? We say pot space is foul smelling. Similarly, in the case of some sweet fragrance, either in the air or in some substance left in the pot, we say the pot space smells very nice. So one pot has got foul smell, another pot has got a lot of fragrance. The attributes are different. So we say that there must be two different pot spaces. One foul smelling pot space and one very nice smelling pot space. And this is the argument by which the Sankhya philosopher puts forward his view that some jivatmas have lot of virtues. Some jivatmas have lot of defects. Raga, Dvesha, Krodha is there. Some jivatmas have got Daya, Shama, Santosha, etc. And therefore the jivatmas are different. Right? And if you argue, as an Advaitan, if you argue and say, no, 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 there is only one jivatma. You cannot say there are different jivatmas. Then that same Sankhya philosopher will say, supposing all jivatmas are one, as you say, O Vedantin, if all the jivatmas are one only, then when I am crying, how is it that you are not crying? That is the argument, right? If there's only one jivatma, the same emotion should be present across all the jivatmas. How will you counter that argument?
All
argument-
feelings, joy, sorrow, all belong to the body, mind, sense complex. It doesn't have anything to do with Atma.
Correct. So sorrow, you will say that no, O Sankhya philosopher, sorrow is not a attribute of the Atma. It is an attribute of the Anatma mind. When the mind is sorrowful, you transfer the impurity of the mind, which is sorrow, to the Jivatma, and you say Jivatma is sorrowful. And this is what is said in this Karika. Yatha ekasmin ghatakashe, even though there is only one spot space, and that pot space is yute, associated with, contaminated with rajo dhumadibihi. With raja here is dust and dhuma is smoke. Rajo dhumadibihi, that space is contaminated or associated, I won't say contaminated, associated with dust and smoke. What happens? Sarvena samprayujyante. All the other pot spaces are not similarly associated or contaminated. It may be that one pot space is full of dust and smoke, but that doesn't mean that other pot spaces are full of dust and smoke. This is not because, and understanding is very, very important. This is not because there are different pot spaces, but you have to understand the pot space cannot be contaminated because there is only one spot space and it is asangha. It cannot be touched by anything. Similarly, tadvat, in the same manner, jivaha sukadibihi. In the same manner, when one jivatma is associated with sorrow, all the other jivatmas are not associated with sorrow, not because jivatmas are different, but because there is only one atma which is always asangaha, and the sorrow belongs to the mind, the reflected mind, to the RM. Sukha, dukkha, that is happiness, sorrow, moha. These are all impurities caused by the gunas. Sattva causes sukha, rajas causes dukkha, tamas causes delusion, right? Whereas Atmananda is not born of gunas. Atmananda is the happiness principle belonging to Nirguna Chaitanya. Okay. Take a short break so far. Any questions so far? Remember, the whole idea here is to finally come to the conclusion that Brahman alone is there. That idea should run at the back of your mind whenever we are going through all these karikas. Okay. Any questions? Right. Karika number 6. रूप कार्य समाख्याश्च
रूपकार्यसमाख्याश्च
विद्यन्ते तत्र तत्र वै
विद्यन्ते
विद्यन्ते
तत्र
तत्र
तत्र वै
तत्र वै
आकाशस्य न भेदोऽस्ति
आकाशस्य न
आकाशस्य न
भेदोऽस्ति
भेदोऽस्ति
तद्वज्जीवेषु निर्णयः
तद्वज्जीवेषु
तद्वज्जीवेषु
निर्णयः
निर्णयः
So the idea that pot space has got differences. For example, there is room space which is bigger than pot space. There is hall space which is bigger than room space, right? There is kitchen space which is in between. There is bathroom space which is not a clean space. All these ideas are there. All these differences are perceived. And he says, where are these differences? What are these differences? Rupa, Karya, Samakhyaha. Rupam is form, Karyam is function, Samakhya is name, Nama. Another name for Nama is Samakhya. So Rupa, Karya, Samakhya. All the differences are nothing but differences in functions, differences in forms, and therefore differences in names. One you call pot space, one you call room space, one you call kitchen space, one you call stomach space, and so on and so forth. So Rupa, when it is there, form, small room, big room. But there is only one all-pervading space. That space is neither big nor small, nor inside, nor outside. The inside and the outside come why? Because of the walls. The space is not divided by the wall. The wall is in the space, right? And karyam, the functions are different. The clay which forms the pot has one function. The clay which forms the floor of your house has got another function. So he says, Vidyante tatra tatra vai. In each case, all the three are different. Which three? Name, form, function. However, Akashasya na bhedaha asti. There is no difference in the space at all. There is no difference in the Akasha at all. Right? But because of the covering, there is a Nama Bheda, Rupa Bheda, and Karya Bheda. You don't sit in the pot while you go for satsang, right? You sit in the hall. And you can't put water in the hall and drink it. That water you put in the pot. The truth is that these differences do not belong to the space at all. All these attributes belong to containers, pots, bodies, etc. Because space does not carry out any function, space does not have any form, space itself does not have any name. And tadvad, in the same manner, jiveshu nirnayaha. Jivatmas have to be understood in the same way. One Paramatma alone is mistakenly understood as different Jivatmas. Why? Because of name, form, and activity Vedaha. Okay. Any questions? So the next Karika is a slightly more complex topic. It talks about the relationship between the Jivatma and the Paramatma. So I won't start it today. And in the meantime, any questions are there, we can ask. You have 5 minutes more. And again, I will say, please revise each and every day's class at least once or twice before coming, because it's a build-up. Okay. Thank you for your patience. There are no more questions. Om Purnamadav Purnamidam Purnat Purnamudachyate Purnasya Purnamadaya Purnamevavasishyate Om Shanti Shanti Shanti. Om Tat Sat. Om Namah Shivaya. Thank you for your patience. Om.
Thank you.